The ground beneath bare feet was young in a way it no longer feels today. Winds still carried the weight of glaciers retreating. Rivers still shifted their beds with restless urgency. Whole valleys rose and sank as ice and meltwater sculpted them, as if the earth itself were sketching, erasing, and sketching again. To step into such a morning meant to be part of this trembling canvas, creatures among creatures, fragile yet embedded into patterns of geology and atmosphere stretching back 1 billion years. Nothing humans touched lasted long, except perhaps the memory of movement itself. Ash from fires taken by rain, footprints hardened into mud, only to crumble, tools left behind and swallowed by moss or dune. And still, some fragments endured, sealed by chance into caves, into layers of sediment, tiny signatures, faint reflections of lives lived under cold stars. We carry these echoes not in words alone, but in the shapes of our bodies, in the deep mechanics of hunger and rest. To survive the Stone Age was to master patience, to notice details, to listen to nature's quiet arithmetic. The tilt of grass meant an animal had passed. An irregular stone might be coaxed into a blade. Every gesture was informed by countless trials before it, by ancestors whose mistakes became teachings in silence. And still, nothing about this survival was guaranteed. Fire once lost in the rain might mean death. A poorly timed hunt could drain the strength of a group. Perhaps that is why memory, even then, functioned as more than recollection. It was survival distilled into rhythm, repetition, and story. Memory was not a luxury, it was life's tether. And yet, how slippery memory truly is. Of all that was done, of all that was seen, only fragments remain for us. The geologic record keeps no diary of a mother soothing her child. And yet, the question lingers, could the Earth itself, in its layers and cycles, be considered a living memory, when tectonic plates drag seabeds into the mantle? Is this forgetting, or is it a deeper kind of keeping? An archive written in temperatures and isotopic codes far beyond what human minds can grasp. We unearth at most a sliver, yet each sliver hints at worlds much greater. It is tempting to wonder whether the Stone Age, as we call it, is less a period, and more a set of scattered reflections. Fragments visible only as light touching the surface of deep water. Perhaps the real Stone Age still lies hidden far beneath, untouched, waiting, never to be uncovered. There is humility in this thought. Whatever traces we believe are important, paintings, bones, carvings, are but dust against the geologic clock. The Earth's greatest archive is silence itself, a silence that outlasts our measures of time, and in that silence the first human dawn is not gone, not truly. It unfolds each time we imagine it, each time we let memory stretch beyond the borders of history, each time we let our attention soften into curiosity. What would it mean to open our eyes then? What would it mean to live without rushing beyond the sunrise, when time itself was not yet watched, only felt? If we could remember, perhaps we would not see progress as a single arrow, but as breathing, a continual expansion and collapse, a movement no different from tides. The first dawn is still with us. Hidden, it rises in our unrecorded thoughts, in the way we reach for firelight, in the way our bodies dream of shelter. And so the Stone Age hums, not as something gone, but as something inside us, folded into every heartbeat. And yet, if even this much of the beginning can be lost to silence, if even dawn itself can drown in time's erosion, what else might remain hidden, waiting within the quiet stones? And so, we turn to the stones, those quiet companions that have always outlasted us. They are not silent, not really, though their words are slower than we are accustomed to hearing. A stone does not shout, it waits. It tells its story not in sentences but in fractures, in the subtle shift of a sharp edge chipped from its surface. For early humans, this waiting was an invitation, a conversation that shaped survival, a shard of flint, sharpened with care, a grinding stone worn smooth by endless repetition. Each one holds memory, not in ink or voice, but in the geometry of its transformation. To break a rock deliberately is itself a kind of language. When a core was struck and splinters fell in predictable patterns, it meant more than efficiency, it meant recognition. Someone had looked carefully enough to see the stone's potential, to coax from it edges more precise than teeth, sharper even than claws. With each strike, knowledge deepened. A chipped edge might cut sinew, or scrape hide, or shape wood into a spear. The transformation was not random. It was a memory carried forward, one stone teaching another, one hand instructing the next. Sometimes archaeologists unearth these fragments by rivers, by long-forgotten hearths, by caves where dust has sealed them for thousands of years, and in each case they still speak, not of the individuals alone, but of the slow conversation between humans and geology. Erosion exposed them. What these objects reveal stretches beyond survival. A hand axe, smooth and symmetrical, pressed into shape not only by function, but also by something akin to aesthetics. Was symmetry comforting? Was it practical for balance in the hand? There is another mystery. Memory not just of individuals, but of landscapes. Certain rocks chosen again and again for tools, obsidian, flint, chert, occur in specific places, sometimes miles from where finished blades are found. This suggests memory not only of the stone itself, but of the land around it, routes across valleys, meeting places along rivers, journeys repeated through countless seasons. The tools are not merely artifacts of hands, but markers of movement and orientation. They are maps of stone, carried within the very grain of the material. Could it be that to hold one is to hold the ghost of a journey, to grasp a fragment of landscape long changed or forgotten? And when the tool broke, what then? Was it discarded as useless? Or did fragments still carry meaning? Some tools were reworked, reshaped, born again from brokenness. Others seem to have been left deliberately, perhaps as offerings, perhaps only as accidents, but always they returned to the earth, to the sediment that swallows everything in time. Their edges waited, their surfaces collected the faint polish of soil, the embrace of minerals. Their survival depended not only on human intent, but on entropy itself. The same wearing down that destroyed them also sheltered them, layering them like secrets trapped beneath rock. If stones can carry memory across epochs, perhaps absence itself is also a form of presence, an unanswered question lingering indefinitely in the silence of the object. They hold memory, not because they speak clearly, but because they do not. Their stillness invites imagination, speculation, a reaching toward lives otherwise unrecoverable. And yet, stones are not the only surfaces that held memories in those early days, for beyond the strike of flint and the dull ache of grinding stones, there were caves, dark and resonant, where walls began to collect images. If flakes of rock captured the rhythm of tools, then cave walls perhaps captured something even deeper, the rhythm of thought itself. In the hush of a darkened cave, stone walls waited with their silent shapes and unfinished shadows, and then fire arrived. It did not roar as it would in our modern imagination. Its beginning was fragile, just a spark, just a trembling ember coaxed from friction, from stone striking stone. Flame had to be persuaded, protected, breathed into being as if it were an infant presence, vulnerable to every gust. Yet once born, it altered everything. Fire was not merely light and heat, it was patience turned into power, night turned into day, fear dissolved by trembling radiance. The first time flames touched cave walls, memory expanded beyond tools. Stone held fracture lines, yes, but fire revealed color, painting, symbol. Perhaps it revealed something deeper, the recognition of the self as more than survival. To survive the Stone Age before fire was to obey darkness. When sun fell and stars rose, the world became hostile territory. Predators moved unseen. Cold pressed itself against skin, and every sound echoed larger than life. But fire softened this hostility. A flicker changed the rhythm of the night. Around a hearth, warmth flowed into bone, shadows danced into patterns, and for the first time humans could sit together in comfort without fear of what watched from the void. The fire was both barrier and bridge. It kept danger at bay and created space for story. Perhaps here, in crackle and ember, the first myths were spoken, shadows of animals projected onto stone forming preludes to the paintings that would follow. Geology itself played a part in this miracle. Obsidian sparks, striking together, dry wood, awaiting friction, caves cradling the ember where wind could not reach. Even the chemistry of air, the precise balance of oxygen, allowed flames to breathe. It is a reminder that survival was always collaboration, never conquest. Fire was not conquered, it was invited, drawn forth, entered into partnership with people who had no guarantee it would remain. Flame drifted easily back to smoke, to ash, to absence, extinguished. It left only memory, and memory, once again, had to suffice, until another spark could be nurtured. Consider what it meant for the rhythm of time. Before fire, darkness marked an end. After fire, day stretched longer, dream and wakefulness braided together by glowing coals. Was this the beginning of human imagination stretching beyond the present moment? Dreams born not only in sleep, but in the shared trance of staring at flame. Our ancestors must have read endlessly into its shapes, the way smoke carried into night air, the way sparks traveled upward like islands of light vanishing into stars. Fire became the first cinema, a screen flickering at the edge of consciousness, feeding thought with shifting forms too restless to ignore. Fire also rewrote diets and bodies. Charred meat softened, releasing nutrients with less effort to chew, fewer parasites to endure. Bones cracked in flame, gave forth marrow, rich energy in scarce winters. Roots hardened in embers became sweet, digestible, expanding the menu of survival. Some anthropologists wonder if physique and cognition themselves shifted because of flame, if brains could grow larger because fire lightened the workload of digestion. If that is true, then flame was not just comfort but transformation, reshaping what it meant to be human, turning hunger into fuel for thought. And yet, fire carried duality. Too much flame could destroy as easily as it could protect. Forests were remade by its appetite, grasslands regenerated or erased. Entire herds could be driven into traps by spreading heat. Those who learned to wield fire learned also to fear its wanderings, to respect its fickle nature. Perhaps that too is why it became sacred, not because it was safe, but because it demanded humility. Survival was never ownership, but guidance, hands coaxing balance from elements always larger than themselves. There is poetry in the way ash lingers long after flame dies. Ash seeps into soil, carrying minerals that still nourish plants millennia later. In caves, soot blackens ceilings as signatures of ancient hearths that warmed children. Healed wounds softened the edge of cold. These layers of carbon, fragile in themselves, become unintentional fossils of firelight, evidence written into stone by the absence of flame. Each streak says, "Here, once, a family survived the night." It is difficult not to imagine circles of figures huddled together, eyes reflecting firelight, voices weaving stories that now lie erased. Did they imagine the animals painted later on the walls? Did they tell myths of the sun born each morning from hidden embers beneath the horizon? Did they wonder what it meant that flame consumed everything it touched? Every story is absent, dissolved into sparks and smoke long gone, and yet the rhythm of fire, crackle, hiss, sigh, remains almost unchanged. A continuity we still know today whenever we lean toward warmth in the dark. Is it possible that fire was the first mirror? In the light of flame, faces could be seen clearly against night. Eyes found eyes, hands met across shadow. People became visible to one another, not only as hunters or companions, but as selves, distinct presences glowing in reflection. To see oneself in firelight may have been the first glimpse of identity as separate, yet belonging within the circle. We call it control of fire, but perhaps the term is misleading. Did they control flame, or did flame reshape them, teaching what it meant to live in community, to share fuel, to guard embers through rain and wind? Torches lit caves, revealing paintings that could not live without their glow. And so, in the hush of early Earth's nights, fire extended memory beyond fracture lines of stone. From sparks to stories, from warmth to vision, it bent survival into something newly human. Yet as the flames subsided each night into ash, another question remained. For fire may reveal the visible, but survival also depended on silence, on the hushed breath of the hunter, on the listening ear of the prey. If stone was memory, and fire was vision, what then did silence hold for those who needed to read it? Silence was a companion as important as fire. Long before dawn, before the first warmth of ember could reach skin, hunters stepped out into landscapes where every sound carried too far, every breath had weight. To survive was to speak less, and to listen more. Grass bent with the memory of passing bodies, water rippled with the echo of hooves. Each track pressed into damp earth was not only a clue, it was a story unfolding in fragments, a diary written in dust and mud. The hunt was never just pursuit of flesh. It was attention turned outward, a meditation on the invisible threads binding predator, prey, wind and ground. In those moments, the earth itself felt alive with signals. Dust held trails of animals brushing against undergrowth. Twigs snapped in patterns almost too subtle to notice. If a deer's weight shifted, it etched the faintest hollow into soil. If a boar rooted for food, the marks of tusks lingered on bark. These were fossils in the making, ephemeral now, but sometimes frozen later, baked hard by sun, preserved by chance. The ground remembered far longer than eyes alone could sustain. And so, hunters learned to read this geological script, piecing together futures from remnants of recent motion. It was not only skill but patience that carried them. Hours might pass in waiting. To move too fast was to scatter the quarry, to waste precious energy, to pause, to crouch low, to let dust tell its story. This was survival. In these long silences stretched the beginning of empathy, of learning to think like another creature, inhabiting its hunger, its fear, its choices. We may call it strategy, but perhaps it was something quieter, a communion shaped not by domination, but by mirroring, by entering into an animal's rhythm, until human and prey shared the same heartbeat of caution. And when the chase began, it was not sudden violence, but a continuation of that attentiveness. Runners traced steps over ridges, drives pushed herds into narrow valleys, persistence wore down muscle. Even the air itself was part of the hunt. The way wind carried scent, the way echoes betrayed distance, across grasslands and tundra. Humans survived not because they were strongest or swiftest, but because they were readers of the earth, choreographers of patience. Their power was not in claws or fangs, but in silence, cooperation, endurance, and perhaps, too, in reverence. The kill returned sustenance, but it also reminded of life given, life taken. We can still see this in traces of ritual, ochre dusted on bones, careful placement of remains, moments when the hunt was more than transaction. Dust was more than residue. It was archive. Even today we discover footprints sealed in stone, trails across volcanic ash hardened in an instant, capturing not just direction but the pace and urgency of movement. A mother holding a child, a small group clustered close, a single sprint breaking away across millennia. We can still read the urgency of steps. Each fossil track is a memory the earth agreed to keep. These impressions whisper across deep time, telling of a moment of pursuit, a moment of survival long after every voice is gone. But not every trail was preserved. Most prints dissolved in the next rain, the next gust. Entire stories vanished as if they had never been. The silence of the hunt lived alongside this silence of forgetting. How much has disappeared? Methods, rituals, songs, the particular rhythm of a group moving together, the knowledge of when to wait and when to strike. We know fragments, but never the whole. And yet maybe that incompleteness is itself the shape of survival, a life always lived in partial knowledge, never certain which step leads to success or disaster. In the hunt, there was no permanent mastery. A hungry winter could undo the skills of decades. A shift in climate could scatter herds. A single storm could erase every trace of prey. Entropy lingered here too, not only in broken spears and torn sinew, but in the fragile erasure of dust patterns. The earth reminded them at every turn, nothing can be held forever. The chase left marks and the marks were erased. Presence became absence, and absence too became part of the memory. And so the hunt was not only dust rising beneath feet, but dust settling again after. It was silence returned. Fields empty, tracks fading back into anonymity. Survival meant learning to live with this cycle of appearance and disappearance, to take what the earth offered, but never assume it would remain. Perhaps that is why, even after fire warmed their nights, people kept returning to caves and walls. In those sheltered spaces, they found a surface less fleeting than dust, a surface that might endure just a little longer, where the hunt dissolved under sky and rain, pigments pressed into rock could preserve for generations. Tools told one kind of story, footsteps another, but on the walls under the trembling light of embers, entire visions could be carried forward through time. If the land remembered through dust, through footprints, soon scattered by rain, then the oceans remembered differently. Shorelines were not only borders but invitations, shifting thresholds where food, story, and survival converged. For Stone Age people, the sea was an ever-changing archive, the tide writing and rewriting notes upon the sand, the waves leaving behind shells, bones, driftwood, each one a fragment of information about what had passed through its depths. To live by the ocean was to live beside a library of silence, a great memory written without words. Coastlines then were treasure houses. Shells gleamed in shallow pools. Mollusks could be gathered with ease. Fish glimmered in nets or were drawn from tidal traps of stone. These were predictable gifts, so long as tides were understood, so long as storms were respected. Middens, the great heaps of discarded shells and bones, still rise today along ancient shores, layered like the pages of a book that stretches across thousands and thousands of meals. Each layer holds clues, isotopes in shells telling of temperature shifts, of oceans growing warmer or cooler, fragments of bone carrying within them the radiocarbon signature of vanished animals. What may look like a pile of refuse is in truth a record of survival, as systematic and enduring as any carved inscription. But unlike stone tools or cave paintings, the oceans themselves were active participants in this memory. Tides washed away some traces, encased others in salt, ocean spray seeped into pigments, softened wood, carried seeds from one place to another, and beyond the visible shore, the deep waters held their own secret archives. Sediment falling through currents layered the seafloor the way seasons layer rings in a tree. Dust from deserts, pollen from forests, particles of ash from distant volcanoes, all drifted down, accumulating in patterns that scientists today can still read. Slice into an ocean core, and you hold time itself, compressed into color and texture, silent waves now stilled into geology. For those who lived then, these hidden records were invisible. Yet even if they did not know the deep ocean's story, they still read the surface pages with great precision. They learned the cycle of tides by the moon's phases, knew when to fish and when to wait, when the mussels would be safe, when storms would arrive. Each observation was repetition, each repetition a kind of memory echoed through generations. This rock will vanish beneath water tomorrow. This inlet always fills with fish at dawn. Spoken or unspoken, these recognitions formed a rhythm, linking survival with the larger metronome of sea and sky. And the sea was not only food, it was orientation. Against the horizon's unwavering line, people measured their place in the world. Stars cast reflections upon black water, guiding journeys across bays and estuaries. Islands appeared like stepping stones, suggesting paths further outward. Coastal peoples became voyagers, daring to ride fragile boats beyond sight of land. What compelled them? Necessity, curiosity, something spiritual, perhaps all three. To set out into the silence of open ocean must have felt like stepping beyond certainty, beyond memory, into the unknown. Yet again, absence became part of the record. Some never returned, but their risk shaped the map of human presence itself. The ocean's memory was larger than human cycles. Waves gradually chewed at shorelines, removing whole camps beneath erosion. After the Ice Age, seas rose, covering valleys, swallowing settlements, drowning forests that once stood tall where waves now loom. Along the coasts of Britain, tree stumps still emerge at low tide, roots preserved by salt, reminders of a world not yet claimed by water. Could it be that beneath modern seas lie whole patterns of life erased from history, their records drowned but not destroyed? Some archaeologists call them lost coasts, civilizations hidden beneath waves, invisible archives waiting beneath currents. And still the ocean continues its remembering. Even today, each tidal pool is a microcosm repeating what has always been, life arriving, receding, renewing. The smell of salt, the hiss of foam, the scatter of shells across sand, these too are fragments of the same story told to our ancestors. To sit by the sea now is, perhaps unknowingly, to listen to what they once listened to see what they once saw. The waves we hear at night are echoes of waves they heard by their fires, the rhythm nearly unchanged since long before us. Oceans preserve with paradox. They erase and conceal, submerge and dissolve, yet within their chemistry lies an unmatched record. Layers of calcium carbonate build reefs that reflect thousands of years of living growth. Isotopes in marine fossils reveal atmospheric shifts, the breath of past climates. Salts crystallized onto stone hold tiny samples of the skies they fell from, droplets of old weather locked into minerals. To study them is to recover whispers of a world that believed itself forgotten. Perhaps that is why the ocean has always inspired awe, even fear. It is not only vast but ancient, not only shifting but enduring. Humans survived in partnership with its gifts, yet always with caution before its depth. And when we wonder now what memory truly means, we need only turn to the sea. For the ocean remembers on scales that both dwarf us and enfold us. Day by day in tides, epoch by epoch in sediment, millennia upon millennia in the slow drift of continents, reshaping where water can reach. And yet, if the oceans can store so much, if every current is an unseen archive, what happens to all that knowledge when waves are in motion, when memory itself is fluid? Perhaps in the crests and troughs, something vital is always being remembered, and always forgotten. If the ocean could remember on a scale of epochs, then the human mind remembered on scales far more delicate. Memory for our ancestors was intimate and alive, but it was also fragile. There were no scrolls to hold their words, no stone inscriptions to carry their stories forward. Instead, their archives were voices, gestures, rhythms tapped into the air at night. around firelight. Patterns of knowledge rippled out in stories repeated again and again, until the repetition itself became as important as the words. But what was not repeated dissolved, and what dissolved was forgotten. And so, forgetting too, shaped survival. To survive the Stone Age was not merely to recall, but to decide what must be recalled, and what could be let go. Each community carried its library, not in walls, not in tools, but in bodies and breath. Songs preserved migrations, directions hidden inside melody. Chants remembered seasons, which plants healed, which roots were poison, which stars to trust when traveling in darkness. And then there were gestures, the cut of a hand shaping flint, the way to set a snare, the rhythm of twisting fibers into rope. Knowledge lived in motion, but each time a gesture ceased, each time a song faded, the knowledge quietly dissolved into absence. How many whole worlds of understanding were erased this way, carried briefly in living minds, then lost? And yet forgetting was not failure. Just as tides sweep away to clear the shore, forgetting left space for new patterns to emerge. Memory without forgetting would only harden, unable to adapt. Lives in the Stone Age demanded flexibility. An animal herd shifted, a climate cooled, a river altered its path. To cling too hard to the memory of what once was could mean death. Forgetting was sometimes the ally of survival, clearing room for improvisation. Even silence was its own instruction. Not every life had to be recalled in detail, not every mistake etched in permanence. Still, glimpses of memory lingered in the most unexpected places. A handprint blown with pigment against a cave wall, a pattern scratched into bone. These small gestures hint at something more than utility. Perhaps the first impulse to resist forgetting, the first attempt to say, "I was here, and I should not vanish entirely." Yet most lives did vanish. Even names, if names were given at all, did not remain. We inherit no syllables of their languages, only shadows of syntax in the ways our tongues still move around certain sounds. The shape of forgetting carved just as surely as the shape of memory did. Geology bears witness to this. For every artifact unearthed, countless others are dissolved. Organic matter decomposed under microbes, fibers rotted, wooden tools burned or returned to soil. Entire dwelling places likely disappeared, erased by rising seas or shifting sands. If oceans remember endlessly through sediment and salt, the land forgets just as endlessly through erosion and decay. It balances itself, record on one side, blankness on the other, and humanity lived suspended inside that balance, knowing intuitively that their stories were always at risk of erasure. Maybe this is why rituals grew more elaborate, why pigments touched stone, why songs deepened into myth. Forgetting pressed people to remember more fiercely, even if remembrance was doomed to fragment. What if we considered forgetting not as loss, but as form? The shape of forgetting sculpted the way stories were told. Knowledge reduced to essentials became portable, transmissible. Wisdom hidden inside rhythm was harder to erase. Children could remember without understanding, carrying phrases forward until understanding was possible. The forgetting carved away excess like the sculptor's chisel, leaving only what seemed most necessary, most transferable. And yet, who decides what is essential? Who decides which story survives? Was some ancient healer's wisdom lost, while a hunting tale endured? Could we still be missing vast reservoirs of knowledge, because they were not sung, not painted, not repeated enough? Even now, traces of forgetting remain evident. Entire cultures of the Stone Age are hidden from us, known only by scattered flints, a handful of ochre beads, faint impressions in rock. Their myths, their humor, their daily words, obliterated. And still, in that obliteration, there is a haunting presence. For forgetting does not leave emptiness alone, it leaves texture. The absence itself tells us something about fragility, about impermanence, about how little permanence truly matters against the deep geologic backdrop. Perhaps forgetting was never an error. Perhaps it was the Earth's way of reminding us that we, like everything else, are temporary. But when fragments endure, when a bone carries cut marks, when fire leaves charcoal in a cave floor, they shine brighter against the background of silence. Each survival is given meaning by the vastness of forgetting that surrounds it. Just as stars are noticed not because they fill the sky, but because they are small lights piercing boundless dark, so too a fossilized footprint gleams more brightly for the millions that vanished. Forgetting gives weight to what remains. And so, in every silence, in every absence, there is an unseen hand shaping what kind of world arrives in the present. Just as people once carried their libraries in song and their archives in breath, So too we carry their absences without knowing it. Our gestures, our speech, our laughter, they echo with forgotten origins, all the things erased, yet still somehow resonant in what is left. For forgetting does not remove entirely, it reshapes, it erodes, it fragments into traces that ripple outward in subtle forms. Perhaps this is what it means to live after them, to dwell not only in the memory of ancestors, but in their forgetting too, to feel the power of what is missing alongside the presence of what is known. And in that balance we recognize the same question that has flowed softly through every chapter: how much survives and how much is erased forever? And yet, beyond memory and forgetting of voices, there were other traces left behind. Traces carried into the soil itself, where bones, pigments, and offerings whispered of a tenderness that outlasted hunger. If stories could vanish, perhaps love itself found ways to endure, in burials, in offerings, in the dust that cradled the departed. When memory faded from tongues, when stories slipped like wind into silence, the earth itself became the final archive. For those who lived and died in the Stone Age, the soil was not just ground beneath their feet, it was also keeper, cradle, witness. Into its layers they lowered their dead. Into its cool embrace they traced rituals of grief, gestures of tenderness that outlasted words. Burials are more than bones, they are messages whispered to time, fragments of devotion folded gently into geology. Archaeologists still uncover these traces in shallow caves and open fields, ochre-dusted skeletons lying as if in quiet sleep. Sometimes beads, shells, or antlers accompany the body, as though survival alone were not enough. The departed needed beauty, needed symbols to light the way into the silence beyond. Was this the first sign that humans looked past mere survival and toward meaning? To bury someone was to acknowledge absence, but also presence. It was to say you mattered, and even though the tale of your days will vanish, something of you will remain inside the earth's vast memory. Red ochre paints so many burials of this time, a powder ground from stone, brushed onto skin before descent into soil. Was it the color of blood, of the returning sun, of life itself, or simply a pigment chosen for its endurance, its refusal to fade? Whatever its meaning, it testifies to an impulse both symbolic and tender. They did not lay the body down thoughtlessly. They lingered, they touched, they carried ritual into the world of geology, staining time with their affection. And yet, the burials were not uniform. Some were solitary, tucked into caves as hidden secrets. Others were clustered, whole families placed close together, as if the bond of kinship stretched beyond breath. In some places, children were adorned with beads, more lavishly than hunters or elders, as though their lost potential demanded beauty to balance grief. Could this reveal that love itself already shaped choices as strongly as hunger did? The earth remembers not only the bodies it swallowed, but the gestures wrapped around them, gestures of love layered into soil. The ground that preserved them was never neutral. Geological chance determined survival of these traces. Acidic soils dissolved bones. Shifting rivers carried them away. But in rare cases, caves, cold earth, mineral-rich sediment, bones lingered, artifacts endured. Here again, forgetting and remembering danced together. Countless burials vanished entirely. The few that remained are like echoes across a canyon, faint, partial, but enough to spark wonder in us thousands of years later. Enough to make us realize that humans then were not strangers, not brutes, but people who grieved as we grieve, who preserved presence in absence. Every grave, however humble, suggests a question. When did humans first imagine a life beyond life? These burials may hint at belief in an afterworld, or perhaps only an instinct that love could not end with silence. We cannot know exactly what they thought. The ochre does not explain itself. The beads remain mute, and yet in their muteness lies an extraordinary message. Even if bodies decay, even if stories fade, gestures linger. A string of shells becomes a whisper carried forward, an unbroken thread of tenderness across millennia. Bones themselves speak in another language. Softer but scientific, isotopes embedded in them reveal diets, regions, and even migrations. Strontium markers tell of rivers crossed, landscapes traversed over a lifetime, weaving back the journeys of people long gone. In this way, Earth not only preserves the dead, but encodes their stories into chemistry. Even if myths were lost, the isotopic script remains, traced cell by cell, an accidental library. The soil forgets voices, but keeps the fingerprints of movement, holding them steady until we are ready to read. And perhaps this is what makes the grave so haunting. the combination of tenderness and chance. Each preserved burial is both deliberate offering and geological accident. Had rains fallen harder, had the soil been thinner, the message might have been erased forever. Those that endure are invitations, asking us to wonder about the countless others lost, about the almost infinite tenderness we will never see, the grief dissolved entirely into dust. But maybe we carry fragments of it still. Our instinct to bury, to leave flowers, to mark graves with stone, these are continuations of ancient impulses. We send our dead back into the earth, not only out of necessity, but out of memory, out of hope that the ground can keep what we cannot. The Stone Age was not separate from us, not alien. It breathes in the way we lower our losses even now, trusting soil to cradle what we love. One can almost imagine them kneeling, hands stained with ochre, voices whispering in the dark, the quiet weight of earth closing above a body. The silence after such gatherings must have been profound. That silence is still here, stretching across time, pressing against us when we look upon the bones. It says more than words can: absence made visible, grief written into geology, memory entrusted to dust. And yet, burial was not the only teacher. For above those graves, along the surface of the earth, another archive waited. Ice. It carved valleys, guided migrations, became a map cold and enduring. If earth remembered through burials, ice remembered through movement, pressing its history into the skin of the planet. Above the resting bodies, above the ochre-stained burials pressed gently into soil, the world stretched cold and immense. Ice lay across continents like a second skin, pressing valleys into shape, carving mountains into sharper relief. For those who lived in its shadow, ice was not only an obstacle but a teacher, a vast presence that demanded patience, humility, and resilience. To survive alongside ice was to learn from stillness, to recognize both power and fragility in frozen form. Glaciers have always been memory made visible, layer upon layer of snow compacted into crystals, each stratum marking a year, a season, a breath of atmosphere caught within its lattice. Tiny bubbles of ancient air remain trapped inside, carrying the fingerprints of vanished climates, carbon from fires long extinguished, dust from deserts thousands of miles away. To read ice today is to read a diary of the planet, a record stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. But for early humans, this record was not written in pages or samples, it was lived. Ice taught boundaries. Whole regions became unclimbable walls, shimmering horizons of danger. Valleys flooded, not with water, but with frozen masses grinding slowly forward, erasing forests, shattering stone. To cross these landscapes was to risk death, yet around their edges, life thrived. Glacial melt carved rivers, rich with fresh water and new soil. Herds followed these greener corridors, hunters followed the herds. Thus migrations were guided, shaped by the frozen hand of the earth. People traveled where ice allowed, gathered where glaciers retreated. Every step they took carried them deeper into landscapes, sculpted anew with each freeze and thaw. And ice was not only challenge, it was archive. Even without knowing, people read it as a kind of clock. The advance of glaciers covered familiar paths. The retreat revealed valleys not seen for generations. Entirely new terrains emerged as if sculpted overnight, though the sculptor was time itself, working strokes so patient, they spanned millennia. To witness such change was to live in a world that revealed impermanence, not in words, but in landforms. Could it be that early humans understood transience most profoundly by watching glaciers rise and fall over lifetimes? Ice also preserved, wrapping fragile traces in its crystalline grasp, bones of mammoth, sinew, even the impressions of grass sometimes endured, locked away where microbes could not feed. Much later we would uncover whole bodies, frozen mid-stride, eyelashes and stomach contents intact, an eerie suspension of time's decay. For Stone Age people, such discoveries must have stirred awe and unease, animals re-emerging from ice, as if death itself were temporary, a cycle paused but not completed. Did they view such preservation as a sign, a warning, or a mystery too great to name? The silence of ice carried lessons as well. Step onto its surface and every sound sharpened, footsteps hollow, wind unbroken, echoes without end. Perhaps it was in these vast silences that people learned to attune themselves, to move with caution, to measure the fragility of life with every breath visible in the cold air. To live beside ice was to accept quiet as condition, to read its subtle signs, the groan of a glacier shifting, the crack of hidden crevasses, the sudden release of water when sunlight pierced too long. And yet, for all its endurance, Ice too obeyed entropy. Even the greatest glacier advanced only to break apart in time. Whole structures collapsed into rivers, floated into seas as icebergs set adrift. For humans watching from shorelines, these collapses were both peril and promise. Peril in floods and rising waters, promise in the life-giving melt. This rhythm of consolidation and release whispered something profound, the truth that even what seems eternal is destined to fragment. Could it be that this lesson shaped us more deeply than we realize? Perhaps ice etched into memory the awareness that change is inevitable, that permanence is illusion. Each glacial retreat unlocked new opportunities, fresh plains for grazing, new waterways for travel. Each advance tested endurance, scattering groups, erasing paths. Ice taught adaptability. It folded survival into migration, imprinted resilience into the very marrow of those who endured. Still, there is poetry in how ice reflects light. Glaciers glow blue where compression refracts the sun, turning cold mass into living color. Imagine standing at its edge, torch in hand, watching sky and earth blur in the translucent sheen. Light bending through frozen time, ancient snow becoming present radiance. For those who gazed upon it, did it seem sacred, alive in ways stone could never be? Did they sense what we now know, that inside it lay breaths of ancestors, tiny reservoirs of air they once inhaled, whispers trapped and waiting? We can only guess. What is certain is that ice changed not only landscapes, but minds. It was both danger and guide, both silence and memory. It reminded that survival was always written in layers, some seen immediately, some stored secretly, waiting millennia to be revealed again. Even now, as we core into ancient glaciers, drawing slender cylinders from beneath mountain ice, we hold the same story: dust from forgotten deserts, gases from fires long decayed, traces of oceans shifting back and forth across continents. The ice speaks, even as it melts. And yet, just as the glaciers preserved, they erased too. Their grinding destroyed countless traces, villages swept away, forests ground to powder, bones crushed beyond recognition. Preservation and erasure bound together, never separate. The very force that remembered also forgot, carving silence into the earth as deeply as memory. And so, ice taught this most haunting lesson: everything can vanish, and yet something always endures. Burials whispered of tenderness, ice whispered of impermanence. Both showed that memory does not belong to us alone. It belongs also to the earth, to elements, to time itself. And yet, if ice could reshape entire continents with its movement, what of the spaces humans crossed upon them? What of the distances endured, the journeys measured without maps, written only in footsteps and stars? When the ice withdrew and new valleys opened, when forests spread where once there had only been frozen silence, people stepped forward into landscapes no one had ever walked before. To survive in such a changing world was to enter into an endless relationship with distance. Distance was not yet measured in numbers, in miles or kilometers. It was measured in bodies. How long legs could carry, how far children could walk before they tired, how many sunsets a group could endure before hunger demanded fire and rest. Distance was first invention, first mathematics, first map, though it was a map held not in hands but in memory, and in endurance. Imagine the world then: horizons stretching wider than stories, mountains visible but unreachable for days, rivers demanding detours measured in weeks. To cross them was not only a test of strength, but also of memory. The mind charted trees, streams, stars with careful precision, recalling where shade appeared or where herds once gathered. Every step carried risk, and every risk sharpened awareness. In this way, distance became not emptiness, but information. Each stretch of ground a pattern to memorize and pass across generations. Geology itself collaborated in this invention. Volcanic ridges and folded mountains divided regions like lines on a page. Coastlines curved into bays that called for detours. Deserts extended horizons into shimmers of heat. Distance took its form from tectonic movement, from rivers' erosions, from the restless shifting of continents. Even without knowing, humans rid these geological scripts, following the grain of rock, the opening of valleys, the slope of basalt and chert. Distance was not arbitrary. It was shaped by the earth itself, by its deep and ceaseless motion. In learning distance, people also learned cooperation. A journey too long for one could be endured by many, sharing burdens of food, tools, and memory. These collaborations transformed distance from isolating gulf into connective tissue. Perhaps in this sharing, identity itself stretched outward, no longer just individual survival, but collective movement, a recognition that to cross the unknown required others. Was this not the first quiet invention of community as we know it, bound by the simple act of walking together? And with distance came story. Paths were marked with narrative. Beyond the ridge lies water. Beyond 3 nights of travel lies stone fit for blades. These stories condensed distance into memory shapes, omens and landmarks, replacing numbers. Perhaps this was the beginning of language for measurement, not units, but comparisons, rhythms of steps, counted in breaths, in songs repeated, until a destination was reached. The human voice carried across distance became itself a bridge. Yet distance did not only connect, it also separated. It widened gaps between groups, scattered languages, created silences between communities. One valley apart might mean generations without meeting. A day's walk could define whole cultural boundaries. Forgetting grew from distance as much as from time. Perhaps some groups, once one, became strangers simply because valleys or seas parted them, until only faint echoes of shared ancestry lingered in gestures or rituals. Distance invented diversity, scattering humanity into countless variations of story, speech, survival. And still, distance was never neutral. It tested endurance and revealed fragility. Hunger pressed against legs and lungs. Wounds worsened when carried too far from safety. To journey meant to gamble with limits. And in this gamble, absence became a constant companion. Not everyone who walked returned. Trails across mountains often end in sudden silence, the footprints dissolving into snowdrift or cliff. Journeys never completed, but still remembered at campfires. Distance measured not only how far one could go, but how much one could lose. Yet, there is a strange grace in imagining these endless steps across tundra or savanna, each footfall soft against dust, each horizon widening into another beyond it. Walking itself was transformation. To move far overland was to shed and to gather, to be reshaped by terrain as much as by time. In some sense, humanity discovered itself in its own migrations, in the repeated decision to leave behind the known and risk the unknown. Every expansion of distance was also an expansion of identity. Today we can map these paths in scientific detail. DNA traces migrations in the helix of our bodies. Isotopic signatures in bones tell where people grew up and where they died, often far apart. Fossils in river valleys show sudden appearances of tools foreign to the region, evidence of newcomers arriving from somewhere else. The Earth remembers distance not in kilometers or miles, but in chemistry, in the mineral seams sealed within bones, in the pollen layers that tell when a forest was entered for the first time. The past is written in distance, however faint its strokes. And perhaps, above all, distance invented time. For to walk for days meant to feel passage in the body, the ache of legs, the rise of hunger, the counting of nights. Time lengthened when measured against ground crossed, and space folded itself into memory. A single mountain could become a century when passed down in stories. Your grandfather walked there once. Children grew where parents began their journeys. Grandparents rested where children first arrived. Distance was inheritance, shaping not only where one lived, but who one believed oneself to be. And yet, if each horizon opened to another, if distance was always unfolding, then perhaps humanity never truly arrived anywhere. Perhaps survival has always been migration, movement without end, footsteps flowing into footsteps like waves along shore. And if that is so, then what was the unseen language that made this movement possible? For surely it was not words alone, but something older, quieter, carried in the body, in gesture, in gaze, the language before words, spoken through silence. Before distance could be measured by stories, before firelight drew faces into identity, there must have been language, but not as we know it. It was not yet carved into symbols, not yet gathered into structured grammar, not yet woven into pages or carved into stone. It was language born of gaze and gesture, of pause and rhythm, of sound that carried between bodies long before meaning found syllables. Perhaps in those days, words were less like labels and more like movements, less like scripts and more like songs. Imagine a small band gathered on the open plain. A child points silently toward a herd appearing on the horizon. The gesture itself is the sentence. A hunter returns with a wound, and a tilt of the head toward water is the command to drink, to heal, to rest. The lifting of the hand to stillness quiets others. The narrowing of eyes toward the ridge signals attention. These were not inventions in the way we create languages now. They were continuations of instinct, extended carefully by trust and memory into something more, an unspoken agreement that gesture could carry thought across the space between minds. And then came sound. Not yet words, perhaps, but exhalations colored by urgency or reassurance. A low hum to soothe an infant, a sharp click to warn of unseen danger, a rhythmic chant during walking, so the pace might be shared, the distance lessened. These were not empty noises, but vessels filled with intention, and over time the vessels hardened into familiar shapes, tones repeated until association grew. Perhaps one call became the call for water, another the signal for food, another the sign of fire, meaning condensed gradually, like dew forming on grass at dawn. Science offers whispers of this hidden past. Our anatomy carries clues, the shape of the vocal tract, the angle of the hyoid bone, the refinement of hearing tuned not only to environmental sounds, but to the subtleties of pitch and rhythm. Long before full words, we were already creatures of sound, creatures who imagined through vibration what had not yet been named. Fossils alone cannot tell us the first words spoken, but they remind us that our throats and ears evolved in synchrony, sculpted to trade not only survival instructions, but also gentler sounds, lullabies, laughter, the first ghosts of what would one day be poetry. What if these proto-languages were less about precision than about connection? Spoken language now seeks exactness, a name, a direction, a boundary between meaning and ambiguity. But perhaps in that older time, ambiguity was not flaw, but richness. A hum could soothe, warn, or invite depending on context. A gesture could contain multiple layers. The same hand shape could signal stillness one day, direction the next. Meaning shimmered like firelight, never fixed but always living. Was this fluidity not itself a kind of wisdom, allowing communities to adapt rather than trapping them within rigid codes? Even silence was language then. The long pauses during the hunt, the breath held while waiting for prey, the stillness of listening to the wind. Silence carried instruction. Silence carried respect. Around the fire, silence could mean agreement, or reverence, or fear. Perhaps it is our modern ears that seek noise where none is needed. To our ancestors, the absence of sound may have been as expressive as the flurry of words to come. One can imagine those first efforts at story, around the hearth. Voices begin weaving sounds into sequence, gestures filling the spaces between, a rising tone for the mountain, a descending one for the valley, a rhythmic clap to mimic hooves. Children laughed, mimicked, joined. Stories were pre-verbal, enacted as much as spoken, painted with movement as much as with sound, and maybe, only much later, some of these repeated sounds crystallized into words that still echo faintly in ours today. It is humbling to think how much of ourselves was born in this liminal space, the space between animal call and human word. Could it be that identity itself formed here, when one person realized that another could hold the same sound in memory, that a signal could outlast the moment of its utterance? Once thought could take form outside the body, carried in air to another, was this not the first seed of culture, the first fragment of society as we know it? And yet the memory of this pre-verbal language has mostly vanished. The earth did not fossilize our voices, did not preserve echoes in stone. What lingers are only indirect traces, the shape of bones, the resonance of modern speech, the shared laughter that still needs no words. The rest has been swept into silence. Perhaps this silence itself is a kind of language, an eloquent absence reminding us of how much has been forgotten. But even if forgotten, the legacy remains. Gesture still fills our conversations, hands moving instinctively when words falter, tone still shapes meaning, kindness draping itself around, even the simplest phrase, anger sharpening, even the most neutral sound. Infants, before they learn words, already sing, and signal in ways that echo what must be as old as humanity itself. The invention of words was not a beginning, but a continuation of what had always been, the reaching of mind to mind through breath, through silence, through gesture. And so, in this quiet archaeology of language, we find ourselves still holding its roots. When we soothe with a hum, when we point, when we fall silent together, we dwell again in that early Stone Age. The language that came before words still flows beneath our speech, a hidden river feeding the surface of all we say. And yet, if humans once carved meaning from air and silence alone, what about the materials of death, of life reduced and reshaped? What of the bones left behind, carved into tools or flutes, drawn into another kind of conversation, the conversation between life taken and life transformed? Bones remained after flesh had gone. pale reminders of motion and hunger, of life that once pressed against grass and air. For early humans, bones were not only residue, they were possibility. Each curve, each hollow, each strength hidden within, was invitation. A rib could be split into a blade, an antler ground into a point, a long shank drilled into a needle fine enough to stitch hide against winter's breath. Death itself became resource, reshaped into survival. The earth had already taught that nothing endured without transformation, ice becoming rivers, stone struck into edges, and so bones too took on new lives in human hands. To carve bone was to recognize material already tempered by time, already refined by natural rhythm. Unlike stone, bone carried warmth. Unlike wood, it endured decay more slowly in soil. Each reworked fragment contained both absence and presence. The animal was gone, but its body lingered, entering once more into the circle of usefulness. And in that transformation, memory deepened. Every needle was echo of sinew, every flute was echo of breath, every ornament worn upon the body was echo of a creature's gift. In this sense, survival became dialogue, not with silence alone, but with the lingering presence of what had been taken. Science now uncovers the elegance of these transformations. Microscopic striations show how awls were used to pierce leather or basketry. Wear patterns at tips tell of sewing fibers across centuries. Some bones bear pigment stains, perhaps ornaments threading through hair or clothing. To hold such a tool today is to stand in a chain of memory. A deer felled on a hillside, a body disassembled with care, a fragment chosen for its resilience, shaped into something entirely new. Each cut mark is both signature and story. Yet bones were not always bent to practicality. Some became instruments. A hollow femur, pierced with careful holes, is one of the oldest flutes we've yet uncovered. Breath stretched into music, notes lifted into cavern air. Imagine the sound, thin, trembling, but human, carried upon the same bones that once ran across grasslands. This was more than survival. This was echo turned into song, absence becoming presence again. In those first fragile notes perhaps lay the earliest sense that we too could create permanence, not by resisting death, but by reshaping it into beauty. At times, bones grew decorative, beads cut from vertebrae, pendants shaped from teeth, necklaces strung with shells and fragments. Was this adornment vanity, or was it remembrance? By carrying bones, perhaps people carried trace of life with them, a gesture of gratitude, or of continuity, or even of identity, marked not only by the living but by the dead. To wear such an ornament was to place absence upon the body, to fold forgetting back into presence. And in that gesture, we see the earliest stirrings of meaning woven into matter. But bones also carried silence. Thousands rotted back into soil without being touched, without being shaped. Entire herds of animals passed into the earth unseen, lives gone with no echo in human memory. Perhaps this is why the shaped ones feel so haunting. They stand bright against the shadow of so much else that vanished. Each bone tool is not just function, but miracle of endurance, surviving against the long tide of entropy, a fragment of existence still holding shape where nearly everything else dissolved. The echoes stretch even into us. Our own skeletons, when returned to soil, are subject to the same transformations of time. Minerals leach, marrow disappears, yet traces remain, scraps of calcium folded into layers of earth. Someday, long after we are gone, perhaps a fragment will be found, worn but recognizable, echoing our own survival in the way these ancient bones echo theirs, silent, but still breathing, meaning to whoever kneels down to uncover it. And so, the bones remind us that nothing truly leaves. Everything transforms, breaking, reshaping, enduring in altered form. Death was neither end nor defeat, but continuation. The bones were teachers, instructing in resilience, reminding that survival meant listening not only to wind, stone, and fire, but also to what remained when breathing had ceased. In practical hands they became tools. In inspired hands they became music. In grieving hands they became tokens to carry. Always they were echoes, whispering that nothing disappears entirely, it only shifts material, only alters form. And yet, if bones could echo lives once lived, what of the walls of caves, the vast stone canvases waiting in silence nearby? Could not stone itself, touched by hand and pigment, become a memory even more enduring than bone, a living library of visions shining in flickering firelight? Beneath the surface of the earth, where darkness pressed in so fully that eyes could not find form without flame, humans discovered a new kind of memory, the walls of caves, cold and silent, became more than shelter. They became surfaces that remembered. Here, where torchlight trembled, pigment transformed stone into living vision. Hands pressed against rock, palms outlined in ochre, animals arched across ceilings as if still running, still breathing inside the silence. In these moments, humanity began not only to endure the world but to depict it, not only to survive but to imagine survival taking shape on stone. A cave was more than a void. Its very geology made it an accomplice in this act of remembrance. Limestone dripped into stalactites, water etched flowstone, minerals cooled into rippled patterns that waited for human eyes. The walls already bore the slow writing of time. Calcite sheets gleaming like frozen rivers, quartz crystals catching firelight like stars. To paint upon such a wall was to join a much larger frame of memory, to inscribe one's own fleeting vision into the canvas already authored by the earth. Perhaps this was part of its power, the sense that their gestures became layered into time's deeper archive, folded into geological processes that far outlasted breath. And so they painted, not randomly, but with purpose. Bison, aurochs, horses, red deer, shapes familiar from hunts and migrations. Some forms stretched with natural curvature of rock, using outlines already present in stone to suggest muscle, motion, life. Fingers traced lines, pigments were blown through reeds, shades were layered to give bodies a weight that even flickering light could not erase. Painted in silence, lit by flame, these animals leapt against shadow, alive in ways bone and tool could not capture. But why? Was it mere record? A way of teaching the young which creatures roamed? Was it ritual? A spell cast in pigment to ensure the hunt succeeded? Or was it art for its own sake, an early answer to the question, how might we speak of what cannot be spoken? Whatever its purpose, the fact remains, these walls were touched with meaning, and meaning endured, where dust erased footprints, where ice eroded valleys, where bones dissolved into soil, the cave walls remembered. Even handprints themselves are haunting reminders. Dozens of palms, outlined in negative, linesome chambers, fingers splayed as if to say I was here, we existed, we touched. Each hand is both personal and communal, both individual flame and collective fire, layered one atop another across centuries. If voices vanish in the silence of forgetting, these hands refuse to vanish, pressed onto geology as echoes of intimate presence. They are not anonymous to us. They feel specific, as though the warmth of the hand still lingers beneath the ochre. The complexity extends further. Some caves reveal dots, lattices, abstract signs repeated across regions. Could these symbols have been proto-writing, an early catalogue of time, a calendar, a code, or were they simply patterns for beauty, meant to intensify the trance of flickering flame? We cannot know, and perhaps this is part of their resonance. They resist our attempts at mastery, whispering instead of meaning half-opened, half-withheld. Like the ocean, like ice, they guard both presence and absence at once. Still, science allows us to see the collaboration behind them. Pigments ground from iron oxides, manganese, charcoal, binders taken from fat blood, egg, fingers dipped, brushes of hair or moss applied. Firelight revealed and concealed at once, animating animals as shadows moved. Some scholars suggest singers or musicians accompanied the painting, sound echoing through stone chambers, voices bouncing in resonance that we can still test today. To paint here may not have been a solitary task. It was performance, memory enacted collectively. The walls became both archive and stage, carrying sight and sound into the future alike. And how long they have waited. Tens of thousands of years later, we step in with lamps and cameras, our own shadows joining those first flames. The pigments persist, because mineral and darkness preserve them. In some places, calcite layers have covered images, sealing them as though the earth itself was determined to protect its inherited visions. What we see now is not only what they saw, but what survived forgetting against all odds. Strokes from hands that believed in continuity, even as silence pressed close around them. Could this be the deepest meaning? That humans, facing erasure each day, sought surfaces that might remember longer than flesh and breath. The cave wall was canvas and time capsule, holding something we still recognize. The urge to leave behind, the ache to not vanish completely. In that sense, the paintings are less about animals or hands, and more about continuity, about standing in defiance of entropy, even while knowing entropy would ultimately win. Perhaps that is why the caves feel so still, even now. We enter them and feel time slow, as if in respect for the silence guarded inside. The ochre is mute, the cows and horses unmoving, yet we come away changed, as though we brushed against minds reaching across 40,000 years. This power is not illusion, it is memory stretched wider than language, inscribed in rock, lit by fire, carried forward out of darkness, to remind us that we too belong to something larger than days and names and individual lives. And yet, even as caves remember, they also conceal. Beyond torchlight, beyond pigment, there was silence filled with vanishing echoes. The walls caught what vision they could, but outside, the great beasts themselves were fading into extinction. For if humans could preserve life in image, they could not always preserve it in reality. And so comes the silence of what was lost, the great extinctions that shadowed their survival. The cave walls preserved their silhouettes, herds of mammoth, the curve of aurochs, the outlines of lions, bears and bison. And yet, outside those caverns, one by one, silence grew. Animals that had lived for millions of years fell away until only their traces on stone endured. The Stone Age people were not abstractions moving through empty landscape. They were witnesses to loss on a scale we now call extinction. And to endure that loss was to be shaped by a silence that deepened around them with every passing century. Extinction was not a sudden thunderclap. It arrived slowly, like breath fading, a herd diminished. A migration failed to return. A familiar form grew rarer until children no longer recognized its tracks. The memory of animals stretched across generations, until memory itself became thinner than the air it traveled in. What must it have been to see the last of something, to encounter the final echo of a presence woven into myth and hunger alike? Perhaps in the beginning, they did not realize it was the last. Only later would the silence settle, an absence too broad to be filled. Science tells these stories now, drawn from bones in caves, tusks in riverbeds, isotopes in soil. We know the steppe bison receded, the mammoth retreated northward, until ice and human persistence erased them. Cave lions, towering bears, saber-toothed cats, all written in fossil rather than in flesh. Each of these animals carried entire ecosystems upon their backs. Their vanishing altered landscapes, shifted the balance of grass and forest, prey and predator. The silence of extinction was not absence alone, it was transformation at every level, biology folding into geology, breath returned into dust. And yet humanity endured, adapting with each loss. When mammoths grew scarce, reindeer filled the gap. When giant deer disappeared, smaller game became more central. People shifted diets, tools, and movements. But how much grief accompanied these adaptations? Did ancient hunters carry memory of animals no longer there, telling stories of their size, their strength, their gift of meat and hide? Or did silence simply erase them swiftly, necessity dulling nostalgia? We cannot know. We only see echoes in paintings that linger long after herds are gone, echoes that suggest love mixed with respect, mixed also with dependence. Perhaps extinction itself deepened reverence. To paint the bison again and again upon cave walls was to resist its fading, to inscribe its presence where breath could no longer guarantee it. These images were acts of remembrance, fragile revolts against erasure. Where the land grew empty, the walls grew full. Survival meant not only adapting physically, but also imaginatively, keeping memory alive even as silence threatened to consume it. But in those long nights, extinction must also have been a teacher. It revealed, with a quiet finality, that nothing was guaranteed. Even the strongest predator, even the mightiest herbivore, was vulnerable to the slow convergence of hunger, climate, and human pursuit. To witness extinction was to learn humility, to see that life's abundance could collapse into absence. That lesson lingers with us still, whether or not we hear it. Extinction is a silence that does not end. Its stillness only thickens with time. And yet, silence is not total. Fossils endure in rock, ivory endures in frozen soil, DNA lingers in strands of marrow preserved by chance. We find these fragments and turn them into story again. The mammoth's hair tells of climate, the lion's claws of territory, the isotopes of vanished migration. The silence of extinction is vast, but it is never absolute. The earth remembers even as it forgets, holding in mineral whispers the biographies of creatures long vanished. We sit now, tens of thousands of years later, still haunted by those losses. We imagine those painted herds moving again, under flicker of firelight, and we realize that the silence we inherit is itself a kind of presence. We feel absence more strongly for what little remains. The caves, the bones, the beads, they are surrounded on all sides by the uncountable things that vanished forever. And perhaps that is the lesson of extinction, that it exists inside us as both fear and awe. Fear, because it warns of fragility. Awe, because it teaches us to notice what we have while it is still here. Our ancestors lived through an age of vanishing giants, and they carried this truth into myth, into story, into reverence. Even as the world emptied, it filled again with memory, with resilience, with the knowledge that silence itself holds meaning. And yet, if extinction carved such silences, if loss reshaped entire worlds, what about the beginnings of change in the opposite direction? What about the first fragile attempts not just to gather, to hunt, but to grow, to keep seeds, to imagine futures sprouting where there was once only passing chance? Out of the long silence of extinctions, something new stirred. For countless generations, survival had depended on movement, on pursuit, on the fragile exchange between predator and prey. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, another rhythm began to touch human lives. Seeds, small, fragile, easily overlooked, offered a different way forward. When scattered, they did not vanish. When cared for, they became more than food in the present moment. They promised a tomorrow, and in that promise began the faint outlines of change, the slow reshaping of what it meant to live upon the earth. The first experiments may not have been deliberate. The seed dropped near a dwelling sprouted the following season. A discarded husk grew into stalks, visible months later. Someone must have noticed. Someone must have lingered before this simple miracle, and sensed, however faintly, that survival need not come only from moving outward, but also from remaining still, from coaxing the land to give again in the same place. This was not yet agriculture, as we know it. It was patience, a listening to cycles, a willingness to wait. Geology, too, prepared the ground. Glacial retreats left valleys rich in silt, soils freshly ground by ice and stone. Seasonal floods replenished nutrients, rivers laid down loam that carried hidden fertility. Seeds found these places ready, as if the land itself invited cultivation. Humans were not inventors in isolation. They were collaborators with soil, with climate, with the restless work of erosion and renewal. Archaeological traces of these early steps are faint, but they whisper. Pollen grains locked in sediment reveal sudden increases of grasses tied to human presence. Grinding stones, worn with use, tell of cereal grains collected again and again, no longer accident but habit. Domesticated varieties leave isotopic signatures distinct from wild ancestors. These are the quiet records, the shadows of hands learning not only to take but to tend. To plant a seed is an act of faith, and perhaps that is why it felt so momentous. Unlike the immediacy of the hunt, where reward was measured in hours, seeds required waiting, seasons, cycles, uncertainties. Planting meant believing in a future, believing that one's labor would feed not only the planter, but the children to come. In this way, seeds altered time. They stretched imagination forward, away from the narrow present of hunger, into a horizon where patience could bear fruit. And maybe, this was among humanity's first direct challenges to forgetting itself. For seeds demanded rhythm, demanded memory of when to plant, when to water, when to harvest. The body alone could not contain this knowledge. Communities had to remember together, generations repeating patterns across centuries. The land became timing device, seasons became measures, and human minds began to live increasingly in cycles rather than in endless migrations. But how much was lost in this turning? Movement gave way slowly to settlement. Wild knowledge of sprawling ranges contracted into intimate familiarity with soil. The language of tracks and tides, of distant horizons, risked being exchanged for the language of planting and waiting. Was something surrendered, even as something else was gained? When fields grew, landscapes narrowed, and so too did identity. Survival no longer depended entirely on the vast unknown, but increasingly on the fragile patch of ground underfoot. And yet there was beauty in this as well. Seeds gathered near hearths meant children could survive winters with less hunger. Fields tended together wove communities into bonds thicker than migration alone. Rituals began to anchor themselves around planting and harvest. The turning of soil became not only labor but story, myth, expression of gratitude. Hands that once chased animals now gently covered seeds. Reverence shifted from arrow to earth. Still, the earth reminded them of impermanence. Floods could wash away crops. Droughts could wither stalks. Locusts could strip fields bare. Agriculture was never certainty, only another bet against entropy. And yet, even when entire harvests failed, the memory endured. Try again, plant again. wait again. In this way, seeds stitched resilience into life as much as tools or fire ever did. Perhaps, in a sense, seeds were the first true mirrors of human nature. Small, fragile, carried in silence, yet able to become forests. They echoed what humans were learning about themselves, that frail beginnings, nurtured with care, could alter the shape of entire worlds. From seeds grew not just food but permanence, not just survival but culture. And still, questions remain. Was this shift driven primarily by hunger or by imagination? Did people plant seeds only to fill their bellies, or also to feel the wonder of coaxing life into being? Could it be that beneath the hands covering seeds in soil lingered a feeling closer to awe than to calculation? The awe of watching absence transformed into abundance by nothing more than time and trust. The seeds carried change forward into every story we tell of ourselves. They promised a tomorrow, even if tomorrow was uncertain. That promise weighed heavily upon every future that followed. And yet, if seeds taught humans to look forward, to mark time and the rhythms of growth and return, what then of the sky above them, the endless cycles of stars and constellations that held another kind of memory, another kind of map? Even as seeds tied people to the soil, the sky kept pulling their gaze outward and upward. The ground gave nourishment, but the heavens gave orientation. To look to the firmament was to see patterns that repeated with extraordinary patience, stars rising and setting, constellations shifting with seasons, the moon swelling and dissolving into darkness. If seeds whispered of futures hidden in earth, the sky spoke of eternity written in light. The Stone Age people did not need mathematics to understand it. They only needed to look and remember. Gradually they realized the heavens could be compass, calendar, guide. Night after night, in stillness around the fire, eyes traced the stars. The constellations became more than random scatter. Shapes emerged, hunters, animals, rivers, that mirrored what was already familiar on land. With these mental images, they could carry the sky with them across valleys and plains. One star pointed to water, another told when winter approached, another marked the long return of migrating herds. The sky became a vast map, not drawn on parchment, but imprinted inside memory. Where the land shifted too quickly under erosion, the enduring sky offered consistency, anchors for orientation across ages of uncertainty. Science confirms this deep intimacy. Our bones, analyzed for isotopic shifts, reveal migrations that span enormous distances. People could not have crossed such spaces without reliable guides. Stars gave them those guides. The North Star, steadfast above the horizon, held as reference point where landscapes offered none. Lunar cycles marked tides, guiding seashore harvests of fish and shell. Meteors, eclipses, comets, these fleeting bursts must have carried spiritual weight, reminders that the heavens were not abstract but alive, always in conversation with earthbound lives. And when stories began to crystallize around firelight, it is easy to imagine the sky as their canvas. Each constellation was narrative, a framework to carry memory through generations, a hunting tale mapped to Orion, a myth of renewal to the waxing and waning moon, a warning embedded in the dimming of seasonal stars. Such stories encoded survival. They carried lessons not in abstract numbers, but in images easy to recall under vast skies. Where ink and parchment did not yet exist, imagination held the role of recorder, and the heavens became the scroll unrolling endlessly above. There was comfort in this repetition. Seeds demanded hope in the unseen. Stars, by contrast, were visible each night. Their return gave reassurance that patterns could be trusted, that cycles would come again. Perhaps this too altered perception of time. The day-to-day struggles of hunger and weather were set against something so vast, so consistent, that human lives must have seemed both fragile and yet included in a larger design. To know the sky was to feel part of a presence immeasurably larger, and to find direction not simply in geography, but in belonging. And yet the sky was no passive backdrop. It was movement itself, celestial motion unspooling slowly across the horizon. Watching these changes trained humans to think in long arcs. When the Pleiades appeared before dawn, certain seeds could be planted. When particular stars vanished into the sun's path, it marked time to move herds. The heavens adjusted human action. It stretched the imagination of time away from days, and toward seasons, away from births alone, and toward inheritance. In the stars, people rehearsed continuity. But the sky also carried mystery. Why did the moon bleed red in eclipse? Why did suns vanish behind clouds for weeks? Why did stars drift year to year across horizon? These were not questions with ready answers. Perhaps in that enigma was a new awareness that some truths are greater than explanation. That awe itself could guide survival as surely as knowledge. The uncertainty mattered as much as the certainty. To live beneath the stars was to be humbled by mystery, while still soothed by cycle. It is worth remembering that the night sky then was unpolluted, sharper, more overwhelming than any view most of us know today. Imagine lying beneath that expanse, fire dying low, silence broken only by wind and animal call. The sky would not have felt distant. It would have been immediate, alive, weighty with presence. In such immensity, people could see themselves not as controllers but as participants. They were small, yes, but they were connected, rooted by seeds, oriented by sky, carried by cycles greater than themselves. Today, when we recover bone calendars etched with marks, or artifacts aligned with solstice sunrise, we glimpse this ancient marriage of earth and sky. Isotopes can tell us where people traveled, but star alignments tell us how they traveled, guided by constellations, by predictability woven into the canopy of night. These are not fragments of superstition, but fragments of science in seed form, profound observations repeated until they became woven into culture. And perhaps, standing beneath such skies, they understood something we still strain to remember, that survival was always entwined with wonder. To notice the heavens was already to step beyond the immediate, to reach inward and outward at once. Stars were not only compass but mirror, reflecting back a truth as enduring as their light, that human life gains meaning not by what it controls, but by what it learns to follow with reverence. And yet, stars could guide and orient, but they could not prevent loss. For even as the sky offered constancy, the earth beneath was shifting, eroding, breaking. Distance carried people forward. Skies held them upright, but stone, always patient, reminded them that time itself wears all things down. Even the tools, the walls, the bones, everything returned to fragments through the slow hand of erosion. If the stars promised constancy, erosion whispered the opposite. Where night skies remained still enough to guide, the earth beneath feet never truly stopped moving. Valleys wore down, cliffs melted into sand, mountains gradually dissolved under rain and wind. To live in the Stone Age was to watch landscapes quietly shift, not with sudden violence most of the time, but with a slow, patient hand that seemed to erase as much as it revealed. Erosion was not visible in moments, but in lifetimes, and still, its touch was everywhere. A tool chipped sharp from flint dulled quickly after cutting. Spears fractured where bone was too strong. Fire left behind ash, and ash drifted away on breeze within days. Even the most carefully chosen rock face for painting, seeming so eternal, carried cracks where water could seep, layer where pigment would fade. In this sense, erosion was a language, constantly reminding that nothing lasted untouched. To survive was to live with this truth, to adapt not only to change but to diminishment, to accept that all things would wear, fade, scatter. Geology makes this truth visible to us now, in grand spans of time. Sandstone cliffs tell of rivers once coursing, limestone caves preserve seas long vanished, volcanic ash blankets, entire regions where forests once stood. But for those early people, this vastness was translated into lived moments, a pathway through rock narrowed by falling stone, a fertile valley disrupted by flood, a familiar shelter collapsed after too much rain. Erosion was teacher not in abstraction, but in immediate reminder. You cannot rely upon any surface forever. And yet erosion was not only destruction, it also created. Fresh soil washed into valleys sustained grass and prey. Rivers carved canyons, opening routes into untouched lands. Winds stripped plains bare, making herds more visible against horizon. Erosion was both giver and taker, destruction and renewal, presence and absence together. Perhaps in this paradox, humans found new resilience, recognizing that the end of one surface became the beginning of another. A tool lost to rust returned as stain in soil. A cliff worn down fed the fertile plain below. To live with erosion was to live within a cycle larger than any single need. In this rhythm, erosion also carried memory. Not memory like words or paint, but memory like scars, layered signatures of processes too slow to be heard in breath. Fossils formed as minerals seeped into bone long after flesh decayed. Landscapes hardened into archives of vanished seas. Sediments captured pollen from forests no longer living, entrapping their whispers for millennia. It is strange to think that forgetting and erosion are kin, and yet remembering and erosion are kin as well. The same rain that removes pigment engraves soil with seeds that will sprout next season. The same winds that scatter ash preserve buried valleys beneath drifting dunes. For Stone Age eyes, erosion may have resembled the work of unseen spirits, shapes shifting without human hand, cliffs slowly disintegrating without obvious cause. Did they see gods in rivers carving their way through granite, or did they accept it simply as the patient background of survival? Perhaps they did not distinguish between destruction and creation, but embraced both as the given condition of the world, that everything vanished eventually, and everything returned in another guise. There is humility embedded in erosion's lesson. You may sharpen the flint, but it dulls. You may mark the cave, but pigments fade. You may build with branch and hide, but storms dismantle. Nothing stays as you leave it, and yet this impermanence is not cruelty, it is continuity. It ensures that nothing holds forever, but nothing is truly lost, either. Particles of stone become soil. Fragments of soil grow food. Food becomes flesh. Flesh returns again to soil. Forgetting, erosion, survival, threads woven inseparably into the same endless fabric. Perhaps that is why erosion feels so hauntingly familiar to us. We live it not only in the world around us, but in ourselves. Our own skin wears, our own memories fade, our bones too will dissolve into earth. Erosion is not distant geology alone, it is the intimate principle of living matter. To watch cliffs crumble is to watch oneself, stretched across a longer scale. The earth and the body share one fate, wearing down into essence, transforming into something else. And so erosion carved beneath every story of the Stone Age, quiet as breath, patient as centuries. It reshaped memory, landscape, and tool alike. It was the touch that taught humility, the reminder that endurance comes not from permanence, but from adapting to impermanence. And yet, even as erosion dissolved cliffs and scattered tools, there existed places of growth and shelter, vast green worlds where stories gathered beneath leaves. If erosion was lesson in wearing away, then forests were lesson in shelter and renewal, a richness waiting just beyond the plain. Where erosion wore things down into fragments, forests gathered things together into abundance. Beneath the arching canopies of ancient oaks, pines, and birch, people stepped into a different rhythm of survival. The forest was not barren plain or windswept tundra. It was enclosure, shaded, resonant, alive with hidden voices. To enter it was to step into a world already carrying stories, each tree an archive of seasons, each leaf a brief syllable spoken and forgotten as it fell. Forests sheltered more than bodies from weather. They sheltered memory, myth, and imagination. For Stone Age people, the forest was pantry, pharmacy, sanctuary. Bark curled into baskets, leaves became coverings for cooking, roots filled stomachs in lean months, insects hummed life into cycles, mushrooms traced the hidden logic of decay beneath soil. But usefulness alone cannot explain the intimacy. To live among trees was also to feel presence, something larger and older, something that had been growing long before footsteps arrived, and would continue long after they had passed. Trees taught scale in a way cliffs or mountains could not. Because trees were not immovable, they were living neighbors, companions witnessed year after year, season after season. Geology carved the backdrop, but forests brought immediacy. Rings hidden inside trunks preserved droughts and floods. Tall canopies folded climate into shade that guided migrations of deer and birds. Even if people could not see these rings, they felt the cyclicity, buds returning each spring, branches forked wider each decade, the sudden collapse of an old tree opening space for new light. Forests embodied time made visible in growth, rather than in erosion. Unlike the dissolving of cliffs, trees offered expansion before disappearance. They taught that forgetting could also mean renewal. Voices, too, transformed under canopy. Fire crackled more softly here, smoke climbing slowly into leaves before dispersing. Songs carried differently, echoes darting between trunks like ghosts. Perhaps myths themselves were born from this acoustic intimacy. Stories woven to match the shifting dimness, the rustle of branches at night, the sudden cry of nocturnal predators. Forests were dreamscapes, shaping imagination, not only through sight, but through sound. What could not be painted on cave walls could be told beneath leaves, narrated by the forest itself as wind filled the role of accompanying voice. And so forests became archives of story, not written in pigment or carved into bone, but performed again and again beneath canopy, Sitting around fire, travelers marked paths not only by constellations above, but also by trees below. Here, beneath this trunk, lies the marker for our return. Bark received carvings, small totems were hung from branches, leaves scattered like transient prayers. Every forest became a book without pages, each clearing a chapter, each tree a margin full of whispered notes. No archive lasts long in bark or leaf, and yet entire cultures rested their memory against trunks, carried forward not in matter, but in voice. We see the fragments now in pollen records preserved in peat bogs, in charred wood buried near fire pits, in faint marks etched into timber that somehow endured. Layers of rotted leaves in soil still carry isotopes of the world they once breathed, recording shifts of atmosphere itself. Science translates these into data, but their origin remains the intimacy of humans tracing survival through green corridors. These fragments remind us, forests were not merely background, they were co-authors of human memory. But there was always duality. Forests sheltered, yet they also threatened. Predators crouched within their shadows. Insects carried sickness, thick foliage blurred orientation. To step into a dense grove was to step into uncertainty, as much as into shelter. This, too, shaped story. Myths carried caution, warnings of spirits or creatures said to prowl among roots and branches. The forest in this way became mirror of the human psyche itself, protective and dangerous, fertile and consuming, comforting and mysterious. Perhaps this is why so many later myths across cultures return to the forest as the place of testing, of growth, of passage. The Stone Age was the seed of this imagery. Forests absorbed attention and gave it back transformed. To move among tall trunks was to feel both concealed and revealed, small beneath their height, yet cradled within their arms. They invited both reverence and awe, shaping identity far beyond immediate survival. And finally, forests reminded humans of their own impermanence. Just as a child could watch a sapling become a tree within a lifetime, so too could a person watch a mighty trunk collapse in storm, its years of growth ending in minutes. Here again the lesson was inscribed: everything grows, everything falls, but even in falling, the ground grows richer, seeds sprout, new life climbs toward light. Forests sheltered stories not because they were eternal, but because they always offered renewal. Perhaps in this rhythm, humans recognize something eternal about themselves, that life expands, wears down, decays, and is reborn into something else. The forest whispered that survival was not linear progress but cycle, an endless renewal of forgetting and remembering, of erasure and return. And yet, even as forests sheltered people in their embrace, even as they filled with story and return, there was still a deeper principle underlying it all, the truth that everything, not only wood, not only flesh, not only stone, is destined to unravel. There was entropy, patient and invisible, guiding every process toward dispersal, every form toward dissolution. Everything, whether forest, stone, ember or bone, carried within it the same secret rhythm, the gradual drift toward dispersal. Entropy was the invisible teacher in the Stone Age, though no one could name it then. It lived in the cooling of fire when attention strayed, in the fraying of rope after too many hunts, in the dulling of blades worked sharp only hours before. It lived in the collapse of shelters when storms pressed, in the wilting of stored roots, in the failing of memory when stories skipped a generation. Entropy was not an enemy, not punishment, but condition, the background hum of existence, the quiet hand reminding that every form eventually dissolves back into the larger whole. Stone tools carried the lesson most starkly. A flake painstakingly chipped broke on contact with bone, its edge blunt after one use. The more it was used, the sooner it fractured, returning to resemblance of the rock it once was. Fires, even when fed, crumbled into ash, and ash scattered until no sign of warmth remained. Hides cured for clothing lasted only a season or two before stiffening, cracking, melting into soil once more. Nothing humans created lasted long, and yet from this fragility came resilience. If nothing endured, then the answer was always renewal. Strike another flake, coax another ember, weave another cord. Entropy pressed humanity into creativity, forcing repetition into habit and habit into culture. Geology, too, bore witness to entropy's reach. Mountains shed themselves grain by grain beneath wind and stream. Ice ground stone into powder, scattering minerals into valleys. Rivers changed course, erasing familiar paths. Even stars themselves, the very compasses of sky, were undergoing processes so vast, so slow, that their light would one day dim. Entropy made no exceptions. It touched every scale, from the smallest spark to the greatest horizon. Perhaps Stone Age people felt this truth deeply, even without theory. In their daily lives they bore witness, again and again, to the fact that nothing, no matter how mighty, escaped wearing down. That entropy was not only decay, it was also transformation. The breaking of flint brought sharpness, the collapse of tree-fed soil for seedlings, the melting of ice-carved rivers and valleys where herds could migrate. Entropy gave as it took, freeing potential held in locked form. Survival itself depended on this paradox. Destruction opening paths to new creation. Death fed fire, fire fed warmth, warmth sheltered children. Every unraveling birthed another beginning. It is easy to imagine how the presence of this hidden law shaped human thought. To bury someone in soil dusted with ochre was already an acknowledgement that flesh returns to earth, that nothing holds forever. To carve bone into flute or awl was to accept that absence could still be useful. Even myths of cycles of animals reborn, of dawns recurring, echoed entropy's pattern, the recognition that ending and beginning are part of one flow. Humanity learned not by resisting entropy, but by aligning itself to it, folding impermanence into practice, into ritual, into imagination. We, looking back now, can name it in scientific terms: thermodynamics, the dispersal of energy, systems moving inevitably toward greater disorder. But in those earliest nights, it was felt rather than counted, felt in embers cooling too soon, in the sorrow of meat spoiled, in shelters scattered by wind. It was an intimate truth, pressing close to daily breath, teaching survival not through permanence, but through repetition, through resilience in the face of loss. And perhaps this awareness pressed humanity toward story itself. Why else speak, record, paint, carve? Why else attempt memory at all, if not in recognition that entropy erases? To tell a story was to resist, however briefly, the tide of dissolution. To paint in ochre, to press a handprint on stone, was an act of defiance. Yes, we vanish, but let this mark linger. Entropy may scatter, but we too can scatter echoes, sending fragments forward into futures we will never see. And yet, no defiance endures forever. Paint will flake, carvings will grind to dust, even bones will powder in soil. But perhaps this too is not failure. Entropy ensures equilibrium, ensures continuity. It makes room for others. It balances by erasing, then gifting space again. For every trace that vanishes, another emerges, waiting to take its place. Extinction and survival, remembering and forgetting, creation and decay, all are drawn along entropy's current, inseparable within its flow. Maybe, deep down, our ancestors understood this. Maybe that is why silence, patience, humility linger in so many glimpses of their world. Every rhythm of their lives echoed entropy. Strike, use, break, repeat, build, see it vanish, begin again. Fragility was not sign of weakness. It was condition of existence, shaping resilience from within. And so, entropy's hand was always at their shoulder, shaping them as surely as stone and fire. It was quiet, but relentless. And in its quietness, it taught patience, adaptation, acceptance. The quiet hand did not simply end things, it shaped the flow of everything being reborn. And yet, if entropy could dissolve all traces, scattering them into fragments, could there also have been things lost beneath the ocean itself? Whole lifeways, whole coasts, entire peoples, drowned and remembered now only in speculation. If erosion scattered stories across the land, and entropy dissolved tools into fragments, then the oceans concealed something even more profound. When the last ice age began its slow retreat, glaciers melted, rivers swelled, and seas crept steadily over low-lying ground. Entire valleys flooded, forests disappeared, plains vanished. For those who lived by the coasts of early Earth, the ocean's advance was not an abstract idea of climate change, but an intimate, daily migration of the horizon itself. In the span of only a few lifetimes, familiar places where people had hunted, gathered, and buried their dead were lost beneath the steady weight of rising tide. And yet, those drowned coasts still exist, only hidden. Scientists know this now through sonar scans and marine archaeology. Submerged riverbeds stretching like shadows beneath the North Sea, drowned forests along the British coast where tree stumps still protrude from mud when tides retreat. Off the shores of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, stone structures lie beneath shimmering water, perhaps harbors or settlements swallowed by seas 10,000 years ago. We may never know the details of these vanished places, but the possibility vibrates entire peoples, entire memories may rest beneath the waves, forgotten not because they lacked importance, but because the sea became their tomb. To imagine this is to imagine silences deeper than caves, deeper than graves. A family builds their hearth upon dry land, passes down memory of a shoreline for generations. Then, year after year, storms climb higher, the sea edges closer. At last the place is abandoned, left for safety of higher ground. Fires go cold, tools are left scattered, shells remain buried beneath abandoned middens. Slowly, inexorably, water arrives, burying everything beneath its shifting archive. That loss is permanent for those who flee, but for the ocean, it is preservation. For beneath layers of salt and silt, traces may remain intact for thousands of years, waiting for us, the latecomers, to wonder. And yet, there is paradox. The ocean is at once the greatest preserver and the greatest eraser. Salt water corrodes, currents scatter, creatures consume, but in quiet places, estuaries silted over, submerged caves, deltas, drowned by the rising tide, the sea guards its memories like sealed vaults. Ancient campfires underwater still show charcoal, middens still hold shells whose isotopes reveal the climate of the day they were harvested. In the depths we find anchors of forgotten time, not only tools and bones but whole landscapes flattened into silence. Marine geologists describe these submerged coasts as time capsules, yet they are also graves, reminders of lives erased by water's patient return. This, too, must have been a teacher. Watching the ocean swell, humans learned impermanence not only in tools and bones but in homeland itself. To lose familiar ground was to understand that even home could not be relied upon. Everything was provisional, even the soil beneath foot. Perhaps this explains why ocean myths are nearly always double-edged, the sea as both gift and devourer, as provider of food and taker of life. To the earliest peoples, its voice was unmistakable. Everything you know may be reclaimed, everything you build may be submerged. And yet, here too was abundance. Fish, shellfish, birds, driftwood, salt. No wonder reverence for the ocean carried into ritual, into myth, into the half-remembered stories that still speak of lost worlds beneath the waves. Sometimes we glimpse these in unexpected ways. Sunken forests off Wales, peat beds off Doggerland between Britain and Europe, islands that were once mere hills in vast plains now gone. Science can map them, but people once lived there, once called them home. They walked valleys now visited only by currents. They built fires where fish swim now. Did they leave their dead in graves that lie drowned beneath layers of tidal silt? If so, those burials still remain, unseen, adding another chapter to Earth's silent archive. Perhaps this is why the ocean fills our imagination so deeply. It carries the weight of forgetting more profoundly than mountains or deserts. Deserts display ruins openly, winds scraping sand from abandoned cities. Forests recycle themselves, their moss and roots wrapping around old structures, but the ocean swallows without trace, transforming land into absence so complete it feels like erasure itself. How many languages dissolved beneath its surface? How many myths drowned before they passed into memory? How much wisdom has been unstated, simply because the sea took the voices before they could be carried inland? And yet, absence always holds echo. The possibility of lost coasts lingers with us, because we can almost see them. Maps drawn from sonar rise like shadows of a forgotten continent. Fishing nets sometimes draw up artifacts as if the ocean itself were still offering small reminders. A harpoon here, a flint scraper there, a carved piece of antler lodged deep in silt. These fragments are enough to remind us that loss is never total, that even when seas wash away entire chapters, whispers remain for those willing to listen carefully. The sea, then, became not just memory but speculation, an archive that invited imagination. Did whole peoples vanish beneath it, carrying with them knowledge of navigation, of art, of agriculture that might have been forgotten entirely? Were there sea peoples before recorded history whose cultures dissolved into tide? Perhaps. Maybe these drowned worlds carry stories far greater than we assume. Maybe the seeds of civilizations we recognize were sown by those invisible ancestors, washed away by sea, or maybe not. The ocean does not answer. It remembers and forgets in equal measure. To the Stone Age survivors who turned inland, leaving behind coasts that sank beneath waves, the ocean's silence may have seemed final. But to us, millennia later, it is haunting, because we know the records remain drowned but not destroyed, sealed into sand beneath the tide. The sea whispers possibility, that much of our story lies hidden, out of reach, waiting. The memory is there, but unreadable. The echo persists, but only faintly. Perhaps this is what makes the waves themselves so mesmerizing. To stand on the shore now, hearing them fold and refold upon themselves, is to listen not only to present rhythm, but to past lives muttered beneath their surface. Every wave may be reminder, every retreat into undertow another page closed and unread. The sea tells us, there are worlds in me you will never fully recover. And yet, if even these invisible peoples have dissolved into waves, what then of our own remains? When time turns us into echoes, what fossils of ourselves will endure? Will our traces, our ash, our steel, our fragments become the techno-fossils of ages to come? Geologists speak now of the Anthropocene, an epoch defined by our own traces. Plastic polymers hardened into future rock, concrete shells encasing cities, radiation dispersed as subtle but permanent dust. These are our techno-fossils, the residues of today pressed deep into tomorrow's earth. But long before plastic or alloy, long before machines left scars across the crust, early humans too created fossils of intent, not by design, but by accident. Stone chipped into shape, ash hardened into cave floors, pigments bound to rock by mineral salts. These were the first techno-fossils, artifacts of survival left behind as unintentional signatures in geology's ledger. A hand axe found in a riverbed is not just tool but techno-fossil, the evidence of thought embedded in matter. It is geology shifted by human choice, not eroded by rivers alone, not eroded by ice, but fractured and patterned by intelligence. Similarly, ochre smeared upon walls is more than pigment. It is mineral relocated, transformed from raw hematite into archive of vision, grinding stones where deep hollows through repeated use, creating small canyons in rock, grooves that speak louder than voices. These are not natural impressions. They are hybrids, earth altered by human need, sealed again by time. When such objects are buried within soil, they blur the line between artifact and geology. Layers press down, rivers shift, sediment covers them, until they become indistinguishable from surrounding stone. Future generations, our generation, dig them out and name them, but for millennia they were simply part of the earth, folded in as though the planet itself had claimed them. In this way, techno-fossils are not only about what humans left behind, they are about how Earth absorbed those traces, how forgetting and remembering coexist within a single shard of flint. And the contrast with us is humbling. Our techno-fossils will endure terrifyingly long, plastics resistant to decay, metals alloyed beyond natural dissolution, skyscrapers one day compacted into strange mineral seams. But those earliest techno-fossils were fragile, a bone awl dissolved in damp soil, a wooden spear fell to rot if not preserved in rare bogs. A cave wall might lose its paint to water's seep, and yet paradoxically that fragility may be why the fragments that did survive are so moving. They remind us of the sheer magnitude of what is gone, the silence that outweighs their presence. Against an ocean of forgetting, one small tool gleams like a star. This is entropy's gift again, an archive composed of fragments, not complete texts. But in fragments lies wonder. A single flake chipped from stone is proof of an entire tradition of tool-making. A single bed of charred seeds hints at experiments in cultivation. A scrap of pigment tells of visions glowing once in torchlight. The techno-fossils of the Stone Age are understated, but profound. They are absence given form. They become powerful precisely because they are so few. Science reads them carefully now. Microwear analysis traces striations invisible to the eye, showing what kind of hide was scraped. Isotopes in preserved ash reveal fuel sources, grasses, wood, or peat. Residual proteins in grinding stones identify what plants were ground there thousands of years ago. These analyses turn techno-fossils into voices again, coaxing stories from silence. And though we can never recover the fullness of their world, these fragments remind us what it means to leave traces at all. And here we must wonder, what fragments of us will one day speak in similar ways? Will future geologists trace our carbon in strange seams, map our discarded cities as fossils in stone? Just as we hold a fragment of antler carved into a spear tip, will someone hold a polymer shard and imagine our lives? The scale is different, the material different, but the structure of remembrance is the same. Traces forged by will, absorbed by earth, surviving beyond intention. Perhaps this is the humility that techno-fossils stir. They remind us that we are already geology, already future sediment, Our choices, however ordinary, embed themselves in stone. The Stone Age people did not plan their technofossils, nor do we truly plan ours. Yet both seep forward, shaping unseen futures. The difference is only in scale. Their traces were tender, often dissolving quickly. Ours will linger unnaturally long. Nonetheless, both represent the same truth, that living beings alter the memory of the planet, leaving archives not in books but in rock. It is worth pausing here in silence to imagine those first technofossils in the hands of their makers, the chipped stone glinting faintly in firelight, the grinding bowl shallow with use, the pigment brush damp with red. To them, these things were not fossils but tools, present tense, answers to hunger and fear. They were not thinking of thousands of years. They were thinking only of tomorrow's meal, tomorrow's shelter, tomorrow's child. And yet, under the quiet hand of time, their immediacy became permanence. Their survival artifacts became ours to rediscover. So perhaps the word fossil misleads us. Fossil is not simply what is dead. Fossil may also be what is remembered, what is folded into earth, so completely that it transcends its own disappearance. Technofossils, even before technology as we define it, are poems written in bone and flint, in charcoal and ochre. They endure without trying to endure. They teach not only survival but continuity, even from fragments scattered by entropy's tide. And yet, if stone and bone record their presence so subtly, what of ritual itself, those gatherings around flame where memory lived? Not in objects but in circles of voices, movements repeated night after night. Could it be that the truest technofossil was not a tool at all, but the echo of community itself, inscribed not in matter but in rhythm, in circle, in return? No matter where they wandered, the tundra, the grassland, the forest edge, when night fell, people gathered in circles. The circle was the oldest architecture, older than stone walls or carved monuments. Bodies leaned inward toward the hearth, sharing the fragile warmth of flame, voices threading together in rhythm. It was more than shape, it was survival strategy, it was safety, it was the human constellation. In the circle, every face was visible, every gesture was included. The circle dissolved loneliness. It placed each person equidistant from the fire, equidistant from the dark. The fire at the center turned the circle into orbit. Sparks lifted as if they were stars, dancing upward into the same sky, people measured by night. Shadows stretched outward like spokes, long lines of connection radiating from flicker to tree to cave wall. In that geometry was something so simple, yet so profound, that life itself felt cyclical, that beginnings led into endings and back again. To watch embers collapse into ash, night after night, was to grasp time as return, as pattern, as circle. Sleep followed waking as surely as dawn followed dusk. Children grew into adults who taught new children the same songs. The circle of fire echoed what the stars already told, the cosmos itself turning endlessly, repeating in great spirals of time. It may be that the very act of sitting together in this form taught the meaning of community itself. In the circle, food was passed, stories repeated, disputes softened, rituals shared, the shape carried equality, no one was higher, no one hidden. Even if the gathering had leaders, all sat upon the same ground, bound by the same fire. The circle was democracy before the word existed, ritual before scripture, archive before writing. Each retelling of a hunt or myth was woven into memory, not through permanence on stone, but through rhythm and repetition. Every time the circle formed, it folded the past into the present. And what was spoken in those circles was never only about the practical, around fire. Voices cracked into song, hands kept rhythm by drumming on thigh or stone. Silence was painted into pauses that gave weight to words. Was this the origin of religion, of philosophy, of meaning itself? The circle unfolding not as record of what was, but as exploration of what could be. Perhaps story did not only preserve memory, perhaps it invented possibilities, teaching children to see animals already extinct, or worlds already vanished, or gods made visible in stars. The circle expanded imagination, just as surely as it expanded warmth. Science finds embers of these gatherings still, rings of charcoal buried in soil, stones discolored where fires once burned. Patterns of micro-charcoal in sediments tell of hearths maintained for centuries in the same places. Ash has stained cave floors black for tens of thousands of years, building up like sedimentary layers of memory, one circle upon another upon another. These modest ruins are not as dramatic as towering monuments, yet they are more faithful to humanity's essence. For they show continuity in the act of gathering, acts repeated night after night, generation after generation, until the behavior itself became more enduring than any single artifact. The circle was always more than geometry. It was metaphor carried into culture. Burials often formed circles of stones or beads around the body. Settlements arranged huts in rings surrounding a common space. Ritual dances stepped out in orbits, feet tracing arcs that mirrored constellations overhead. To humans of the Stone Age, perhaps the circle was not symbol at all, it was simply how existence revealed itself. Seasons circled through birth, growth, decay, return, moons circled, stars circled, fire circles, time circled. Life itself felt less like a straight path, and more like a wheel always coming around again. Yet circles were not only markers of comfort, they also mirrored entropy's lesson, that all returns to where it began. A fire circle blackened the same patches of ground until soil itself changed. Communities rose and fell, leaving rings of post holes in earth where huts once stood, each ending folded back into beginning, repetition carrying both reassurance and sorrow. In the circle was joy of continuity, and also reminder that nothing is linear, no progress without return, no return without loss. Perhaps this is what the circle imprinted on us most deeply. Not just memory, not just social bonding, but perspective. To live inside cycles is to hold humility, to know that nothing escapes repetition. The same stars return, the same hunger returns, the same warmth is sought anew each night. The circle does not promise permanence, but it does promise recurrence, and in recurrence is both fragility and hope. The fragile knowledge that we too will one day vanish as surely as wood collapses to coal, and the hopeful knowledge that others will light fire again, will form a circle again, will remember us even faintly within their own rhythm. Even today, though the tools have changed, the shape remains. We still gather in circles, around tables, around campfires, around songs and rituals. The ancient pattern has not vanished. It lingers deep inside us, tugging us back to the geometry of community. Perhaps we do this not because it is efficient, but because it resonates with something older than memory. The prehistoric hum of circles repeating across time, fossilized in our behavior, as surely as flint is fossilized in soil. And so the circles of firelight become the circles of history. They remind us that humanity's first monument was not stone, not bone, not pigment, but the act of gathering together, equidistant from warmth, equidistant from dark. That act itself is what endures, greater than any artifact, the ritual at the heart of survival, the circle cradling both story and silence alike. And yet, if circles defined community through return, what then defined humanity's direction forward? What image could carry not only cycles of fire, but the question of what awaited beyond dawn, beyond generations, beyond survival itself, in the long tomorrow? Perhaps the most haunting truth of the Stone Age is that it never fully ended. We look back on those people as distant, primitive, separate. Yet in every gesture of our hands, in every rhythm of our days, in every story told in circles of family or friends, their presence lingers. We are not removed from them. We are extensions of them. The Stone Age hums beneath us like a buried river that still shapes the ground, though we no longer see its current. And the question it leaves us with is not just how they lived, but what of them survives within us now, and what of us may survive into the long tomorrow. Think once more of their mornings. A spark coaxed into flame, a circle forming against dark, children watching sky, tracing stars back to stories repeated again and again. Nothing in those rhythms has fully vanished. We still rise each day with reliance upon fire, though we give it different names: electricity, combustion, light. We still gather in circles when we need comfort. We still draw symbols, still tell stories, still leave handprints of ourselves upon walls, though ours are digital walls, faint and unstable. So much has changed in scale, in speed, and yet the shapes remain. The human impulse to endure, to resist forgetting, to leave trace, this has never vanished. The earth remembers in layers: stone tools fossilized in sediment, bones imprinted with isotopic whispers, ash sealed into cave floors, burials protected by soil. What will the layers say of us? Future archaeologists will not look only upon seeds or pigments, but upon alloys, plastics, radioactive seams. Our technofossils are louder, stranger, more intrusive, and yet perhaps when they are uncovered, their meaning will not be so different from a handprint painted 30,000 years ago. Both are echoes. Both are attempts to say, we were here, we mattered, remember us. Humanity has always reached for continuity, whether in flint, in ochre, in steel, or in circuitry. That gesture is perhaps the deepest kinship we share across time. But the Stone Age also teaches humility. For all that lingers, far more has vanished. Entire mythologies dissolved because they were never painted or repeated. Entire dialects disappeared with the last breath that spoke them. Whole coastal worlds drowned and forgotten by seawater. Even the remembered fragments, paintings, beads, hearthstones, are only pieces surrounded by oceans of absence. We inherit a story that is incomplete, a narrative stitched from silences as much as from traces. And this reveals a truth about the long tomorrow. We too will be remembered incompletely. What we believe essential may be lost. What we dismiss may endure. Memory is not ours to control. It belongs to time and to earth. Perhaps this is what the long tomorrow truly means. Not a place where everything is preserved, but a horizon where forgetting and remembering continue their endless dance. The Stone Age entered its long tomorrow not by ending, but by echoing within us. The tools became metaphors. The fire became technology. The seeds became agriculture. The stars became science. But beneath each is the same pulse of survival, the same awe toward silence, the same longing for story. Their tomorrow is our today. Our today will be someone else's tomorrow. The circle continues. There is tenderness in this, to know that nothing is permanent, yet nothing is wasted. Every gesture we make falls into Earth's archive in some form. Our bodies become soil, our buildings become dust, our words dissolve into silence, and yet in all this dispersal, there is invitation. New stories, new lives, new growth arise from what earlier ones have surrendered. The long tomorrow is not eternity, it is continuity, life refolded, time recycled, memory fragmented, and reborn in unexpected ways. Think of the handprints pressed onto cave walls long ago. They did not know we would look at them tens of thousands of years later. They pressed pigment in silence, perhaps only to say, I live, I breathe, I am here tonight, and yet we receive their voices across the abyss of time. Every story we tell is the same, an offering into darkness, a message whose destination is unknown. Perhaps thousands of years from now, a fragment of our world, a poem etched onto plastic, a trace of carbon locked in stone, will be received in the same way, not complete, but still carrying presence, still whispering across silence, we lived, we mattered, remember us. This is the profound humility and gift of the Stone Age. It shows us that what survives is not perfection, but fragment, not certainty, but possibility, and yet fragments are enough. From a single flake of flint, we imagine traditions that lasted millennia. From a single handprint, we feel companionship. From a single bone flute, we hear the first music of humanity in our minds. The long tomorrow will not keep everything, but it will keep enough to remind whoever comes. After that, life was lived with wonder, with love, with hunger, with story. And perhaps that is what it means to live wisely now, not to seek permanence, but to accept that impermanence is the condition in which meaning glows brightest. Ashes glow in firelight only briefly, but while they glow, warmth spreads, comfort arises. A footprint pressed in mud may vanish by morning, but while it lasts, it testifies someone was here, someone walked this way. The truth of our existence is not negated by its fragility, it is illuminated by it. The long tomorrow is always beginning. Each fire we light, each seed we plant, each circle we form around story is part of it. The Stone Age people did not know they were shaping us, yet here we are carrying their echoes, and we do not know whom we are shaping, yet echoes will carry forward all the same. It is not our task to choose what survives, it is only our task to live as though every gesture matters, because every gesture enters time's unfolding archive. So perhaps the question is not what will last, but how do we want to be remembered, however incompletely? With what kind of tenderness will we leave our trace? With what kind of humility will we return to earth? With what kind of awe will we teach our children to look at stars, to listen to silence, to touch stone and feel in it memory deeper than their own? The Stone Age hums still in our blood, because it is not only past but pattern. The long tomorrow is not a place or an age but a melody, carrying forward through forgetting and remembering alike. We live within it already, just as they lived within it then, unaware of its unfolding. And when we close our eyes tonight, when silence surrounds us, perhaps we feel it most clearly, the pulse of an ancient world that still beats in us, carrying us forward through darkness toward every dawn yet to come. And yet, perhaps that is the hope we inherit. Not that we will be remembered completely, but that our fragments may glow across time the way theirs glow to us now, enough to comfort, enough to guide, enough to remind whoever looks back that humanity's deepest lesson has always been the same, that survival is wonder, that impermanence is beauty, and that everything, always, is part of the long tomorrow.